originally in the evening. You might be watching it anywhere though, because we are an asynchronous pre-recorded program. Welcome to Wednesday night sessions. This will debut on a Wednesday night at 7 o'clock Eastern. But like I said, you might be watching it on your lunch break. Who knows? I am your host, Mitch Nobis, coming to you from Farmington, Michigan, a suburb of Detroit. We often think of it as suburbs, but this is one of those funky towns. Like, it's actually ancient. It's just not literally ancient, but 100 or 200 years old. It's a small town that the suburbs grew around. But anyways, I'm in Metro Detroit. I don't know why I'm bothering to tell you all that. I was just thinking about it because it's a cool town and I like my town. And we are sponsored by our local arts organization, Kickstart Farmington. So there you go. That's the connection. Again, I am your host, Mitch Nobis, a writer and teacher here in this area. And as always, with Wednesday night sessions, we're going to follow the same format as usual. We're going to have a short reading from our guest, Evan Williams. I'll let him introduce himself here in a moment. And then we'll do just a quick little 2-question interview at the end. Short and sweet and online friendly is how I like to think of it. Maybe it's just me and my short attention span, but hopefully it works for you all too. All right. Again, joining us tonight is Evan Williams. Evan, take it away. Tell us a little bit about yourself and then give us a reading if you would, please.
All right. Thank you very much, Mitch. I am Evan Morgan Williams. I throw my middle name in there just so that when people see Evan Williams, most people just think of the whiskey. So that just makes me easier to find on Google and so forth. But yeah, I'm Evan Morgan Williams. I have 3 collections of short stories. And my latest collection of short stories is coming out this fall. It's called Stories of the New West. And the title is ironic because, when you come out west, like many people do, seeking the promise of something new, those promises often don't always come true, and they have to deal with the aftermath of that. And that's not a new story. That's an old story. That's been part of the West since time immemorial. And so the title of the book is me taking some risks with my own writing style, trying some new things. But in terms of people dealing with promises and disappointment and the aftermath of what they hoped would come true, well, I'd like to think that story is pretty old. What I'm going to read to you is a story in the middle. I'm going to take an excerpt from a story where a narrator, a high school boy, is going on a first date with this girl, the girl of his dreams. And the woman that he's going to go on the date with, her mother is very strict, and her mother insists that they do the first date at their house. They're going to be doing homework during the date. The mother's going to supervise. The date begins. The 2 kids are doing their calculus homework together, and they're giving it a good go. The mother's watching over their shoulder the entire time. And at a certain point towards the end of the homework session, the mother sends the daughter out of the room, and then the mother begins to speak. And that's where I'm going to begin reading right now. Nyanapreet's mom said in perfect accented English, "Nyanapreet, would you fetch me a glass of water?" Yes, Mama. "A nice tall drink of water. Take your time." Nyanapreet glared at her. Deep brown eyes began to glisten with tears. "Off you go now, scoot." Nyanapreet rose and turned to go. I felt the breeze of her sari as she passed. She stomped into the kitchen. I heard glassware being shoved around. Her mom said, "Easy in there." More noise from the kitchen. Punjabi words were flung into the kitchen. Punjabi words came clattering back. The mom turned to me. "Nyanapreet is a silly girl, and I love her. Now, I need you to listen to me. I have never hidden myself behind vague longings, so this story is no secret I harbor. I tell you that in my life, I have not been happy, but I could have been, and I don't mind saying so." Dishes were clattering. She said, "Listen, my father in India was a beekeeper. He kept his hives on a wagon, and he fertilized all the apricot trees in the valley. After the trees were done, he seeded a cover crop in the orchards, tiny flowers blooming, millions of bees at work. If you sneaked into the orchards with the boy, trampling the flowers between the trees, the story of your assignation was plain to see. Now, I didn't know what an assignation was. Perhaps it involved necking. She continued. Those were troubled days. My father hoped for no rain, flowers that would bloom with no mold. My father worried about the rain, and he took it out on me and my sisters, or my mom, if we were lucky. Staring at clouds that roiled like stormy thoughts, he cried, "Not yet, not yet." Then the flowers went to seed and died, and the apricot trees slept for a year, dreaming of their beauty, and the rains would be welcomed. You could trample across the flowers like pebbles in a sidewalk, and your father's fists unclenched. I was going to interrupt to say that my dad had grown up on an orchard too, and she cut me off. She said, "You listen to me. My parents had 3 daughters, each of us beautiful. I don't mind saying this. We were as beautiful as my precious daughter that you have seen here. So of course the boys made trouble for my father. But what did boys know about girls? As a prank, they came one night and turned over the wagon carrying the hives. This was a stupid thing to do. Who would fertilize the trees anymore? The boys ran. This was simply fearful, as bees at night are quite docile. My father fixed the hives, fertilized the trees, and when the season was done, he sold honey to those very families. He made his beautiful daughters go with him too, door to door, plump jars of honey in our arms. The boys could have the honey, but they could not have the girls. Such things were carefully arranged. Boys would have to wait. Let them retreat to their magazines of American girls. Let them kiss the pictures and do more if they knew how. The kitchen was silent now. The mom said, "Here is what is going to happen. One evening soon, my husband and I will dress to go out, maybe to catch a movie. Did you know that he and I do nothing together anymore? Of course you don't. Nyanapreet, however, will call you on the phone as soon as we leave the house. She will wear her hair loose and easy to undo, maybe a blouse that is likewise easy. Be aware that a girl's blouse is buttoned in the opposite direction from a boy's shirt. The 2 of you will leave in your father's car, which you will have borrowed for the evening. Wherever you go is up to you, but make it a private place, please, perhaps beneath a tree. You will park the car and begin an ungraceful thing. In your clothes, faces turned, God forbid you should actually see forgiveness in each other's eyes, you will experience the confusion of beginners, knowing that each of you has a part to play, for you have seen the videos in your health class, you've read the stories in those insipid magazines, you know how the parts fit together, but not really. The older boys may have told you tales, exaggerated conquests, and in their lies, they have set the bar so high, you're afraid of getting it wrong, of being laughed at. All you pray is to not go soft. That is the great fear of a man, yes, but for you, a worse fear will be realized. You will discharge, what is the word, your bodily fluid onto the floor of your dad's car, onto my daughter's blouse, onto her long hair. Premature, disgusting, botched. That is how you will not get my beautiful daughter. It is arranged that you will never get her after how badly this goes. A bungled thing is not a thing at all. The failure will toxify the romance. So when my daughter says, "I want to go home," take her there. This is when you're supposed to hold hands, saying nothing, driving down the road, thinking of your hand in hers as though that soft hand held the world, but your hands won't even be touching. The distance between you will be sealed. Maybe you'll get stuck at that infernal train crossing below the neighborhood. Maybe it will be a long train, one of those coal trains that run at night. You'll think to yourself, this train lasted long enough to have fucked my girl, but that possibility expired a long time ago. And when you arrive to the house, ask her, "Another time?" She'll say something like, "I'll have to ask my mom." That will be the easy way of saying no, God bless her. At this point, Nyanapreet's mom put her hand on my knee. Maybe she read my stunned expression. "I'm not stupid," she said. "I'm not giving her away. This is no arrangement. I simply know that you have no idea what you're getting into. You don't know any more than she. In fact, your ineptitude will sour each of you on the other. She will marry the nice Sikh boy that we like. She will never doubt it's the right thing to do. She will never say your name again, not even think it. There will be no regrets. Oh, do not worry. You will have your time. You will learn, or you will learn to lie. Do either of those things and you'll be a man. Just please learn on somebody else's body, not hers. Nyanapreet's mom sat back and folded her arms. Because you are nothing, she said. Because when you dream, it is silent night. In the dark, you listen to patent nothings. That's what you dream about, isn't it? You can't summon any detail. How long until you start yelling other people's stories in place of the ones you do not have? I don't know. I don't care. I only know you won't be telling this story. Nyanapreet is infatuated with you now. I can see that. I was that way once. I don't need to be told. You don't need to hide it from me. I have known longing and happiness, but I know more than you that longing and happiness do not last. Does the girl's body promise the universe to a boy? Our Sikh religion says that a loving couple is two bodies with one soul, but I don't believe that anymore. Now, where is my tall drink of water? Nyanapreet's mom left for the kitchen. She yelled at Nyanapreet in Punjabi. She used Nyanapreet's name, her voice growling as deep as a man's, and the name sounded so different, so otherworldly, so harsh. Could we have been talking about the same girl? Cigarette smoke wafted from the kitchen. Nyanapreet's mom cried, Jesus Christ! And Nyanapreet wailed, leave me alone. I'm going to stop there. The collection is Stories from the New West. The publisher is Main Street Rag Press.
That's not the end of the story, is it?
No, there's a little bit more. There's about 2 more pages.
Oh man, I got to find out how that one ends. That was quite a scene. Every writer dreams of a Hollywood contract. I would love to see a fine pair of actors like chew that scene up. That would just be fun to watch. What a
right, because one of the characters is listening almost the entire time.
Yeah.
So that to me would be a challenge for an actor to have the story read on his face as he's listening to this mother crush his dreams.
Right. Yeah. And like, just you can pay, I could, as a reader or as a listener anyways, like I could see the face of the boy, like, hopes crushing and like just soul getting, put through the grinder the whole time.
Yeah.
Just a fantastic scene. Very intense. Yeah, just marvelous. Thank you for choosing that one and reading it. All right. So the 2-question interview. First one is always something kind of craft oriented. And I have like 3 or 4 different options here. Like as I was planning for this episode, I have a few different things. So I might do remember how math in high school, like, no, you've only got 4 questions to do for homework, but it was like 1A, 1B, 1C. I might sneak in more than 2 questions here. I'm mostly a poet in my own writing, but I've been working on a large fiction project for a long time, but I'm trying to finish it right now, which is a long intro for saying, like, I love picking other writers' brains, and I'm really thinking structure right now. So it's something so character oriented like that, and a lot, your other work, the things I read on your website are very character focused. How do you think about structure? Like if you think of like kind of a traditional 3-act structure or a hero's journey, pick whichever framework you want. You're getting like you've got the conflict, you've got all the problems. How do you handle that transition between like the build to here's the ending, here's how it wraps up? Like how do you picture that as the writer? Is that something that just kind of comes naturally, or do you actually like look with that lens as you're revising? Like how do you make that transition to the ending?
Well, for me, I would say I have 2 strategies. And one is that sometimes I have a story where I get the voice of the narrator, especially if it's a first-person narrator, but even a third-person narrator. If I can get the voice and I'm really lucky and you get into that thing called flow, I can just get the story. And the story structure almost comes to me like it's received. And I don't have to do a lot of tinkering. Doesn't happen very often that way. The other way I get structures is that I study short stories. I study other people's writing. I will literally take a short story I like that maybe I found in a collection. I'll rewrite the whole story by hand just to feel myself going through the structure. I'll take notes, I'll draw little diagrams, and I'll start to make visuals. And so, for example, the story that I just read to you is inspired by a story by Isaac Babel, where I read the story over and over, and then I wrote the story out by hand. I took elaborate notes, and then I just created an arc. I kind of imagine an arrow shooting out from it, and I just create this arc, and I ask myself, how can I tell the story that I want to tell using what I've learned from Isaac Babel's story? And that's usually helps me get out of my own head, because if you ask me to design a structure from scratch, it's going to have all the limitations, all the blind spots that I create because I can't see outside of my own head.
Yeah.
So my reading, the things that I read directly inform the things that I write.
That's a great answer. I'm always fascinated, I've read other craft books and listened to, podcasts, things like that. And I'm always fascinated by all the different approaches and like the people who do the detailed outlines and scene by scene, even using graph paper. I forget who it was.
Yeah.
Somebody uses graph paper to visually, chunk the whole outline. And I wish my brain worked that way. It seems like it would be such a smooth way to make sure that you've got all the puzzle pieces, so to speak. I appreciate your answer though. I think that's how my brain tends to work more too. Like intake, and then, it kind of comes out.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to be careful. If you have too much of a plan, like you're describing, then you're putting limitations on what the story could be, because I'm sure that during the revision process, the story might start talking back to you and saying, no, it's going to go this way. You might have you got it on the page using that structure, but during revision, you're going to notice things where it's like, well, no, I think the story needs to go in this other direction.
Yeah, absolutely.
That sort of thing.
People often talk about how the characters kind of have their own will, and it can happen when you get into it. If you create a believable character who's kind of got their own spark, they'll tell you what they want to do sometimes, right? You got to roll with it.
Totally.
So I am going to sneak in a 1B to this then. So I'm going to forget the title of the story, but one of the stories of yours I was reading a while back is very kind of experimental in structure. Instead of standard end punctuation periods, it's like slashes, almost like a prose poem. So when you write in kind of an experimental format like that, how does that, because that's very different than the story you just read with kind of a, so to speak, standard structure. How do those work for you when you do something with kind of a unique approach like that? Is it similar? Like, are you still thinking narrative and then playing around with the visual element later, or does it just come out that way?
I feel I still have to be loyal to everything I just said about listening to where the story wants to go. I still have to be loyal to my impulse to get inspired by things that I'm reading. So those pieces are still there. In that particular case, putting an experimental piece on top of that, it has to still be working in the service of telling a good story. So like the story you're referring to, it's in the collection. And that particular story is inspired by, I went to a reading by Luis Alberto Urrea. And if you've ever got to go to one of his readings, he's incredible. It became very clear during his reading that he didn't have any notes up there. He didn't have a transcript of the story. He was telling the story completely from memory. And then it also became clear that he was beginning to embellish the story as he was going along. And so I thought, I want to write a story that is going to come out different every time people read it. And so when I went through the story that you're referring to, I removed all the punctuation and I invented a little slash punctuation mark. And then I removed all the transitions, all the conjunctions. And I just thought, whoever reads this story, they can insert them wherever they want. It'll be different every single time. That's kind of the experimental piece, but that's not going to work unless there's still a good narrative with good character development, all of that kind of stuff. So to that extent, I experiment with a lot of things visually on the page, but I'm not really an experimental writer in the sense of a lot of experimental writing that I've seen.
Yeah. I think that's where the question came from in my mind, because it's a great story, and it really moved like a narrative, and that's kind of why I was wondering, sort of a which came first, chicken or the egg question, really. Like, did the story come to you first and then you messed with format, or did the format drive the narrative? Ultimately, as long as there's a good narrative, it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. So the second question is usually sometimes it's goofy, like what's the best Oreo flavor or something like that. But we are coming out of Metro Detroit, and we are a show that often features people with Michigan connections in some way. And I'm really excited about this one. Evan and I were emailing, setting up tonight's episode. I thought he was just one of our non-Michigander guests, and he says, no, I have some Michigan connection. I kind of want to just throw it to you and just like tell us about your Michigan connections, because there are many and they're fascinating. So your question isn't so much a question, just like, you're not a Michigander. It sounds like you haven't even been to Michigan.
I've never been to Michigan.
But you've got these crazy deep Michigan roots. So tell our Michigander audience your cool Michigan connections.
Okay, I brought a few things here. This is my ancestor. That's John R. Williams. He is the first mayor of Detroit. After the city, yes, back in the early 1800s. And then this is from Michigan in the Civil War. This is General Thomas R. Williams, killed in the Civil War during the Battle of Baton Rouge, quite possibly by his own troops. There's some question about that. So hopefully I'll get a better treatment from the audience here. And then my great-grandmother was a Michigan writer. She wrote books for kids. This is Dandelion Cottage. She lived up in Marquette, Michigan. And this book was a fairly unremarkable children's book, except for one thing. This was Beverly Cleary's favorite book as a child. Literally, Beverly Cleary would I've read about this. She would go to the library, and the librarian she would hand the book to the librarian, and the librarian would say, not that book again. So I don't know. In some way, my great-grandmother maybe just kind of inspired Beverly Cleary a little bit. Who knows? It's kind of cool to think about that connection, though. Having said that, like you said, I've never been to Michigan. I have this image of Michigan in my head because I've read all the Hemingway stories, but that's it. I've come full circle by doing this podcast.
Yeah, seriously. Well, and someday this originated as a live, what's the word I'm looking for? Event series. So someday maybe we can get you to Michigan in person. You can check it out. Those are all three of those are insanely awesome anecdotes. Like, not only a mayor of Detroit, but the first, a Civil War general with, speaking of narrative intrigue, may have been off by his own soldiers. And then Beverly, we owe you a debt of gratitude. Thank you to your was it great-grandma, or
my great-grandmother?
Great-grandmother. We all owe you. If Beverly Cleary did what she did because of your great-grandmother, my Lord, thank you. She's one of the best. I'd be willing to bet, without taking a poll, at least 90% of our audience members love Beverly Cleary, because who doesn't love Beverly Cleary?
Right. And, I'm just saying this is more like the butterfly effect. It's certainly not like she changed Beverly Cleary's life, but in some tiny way, maybe she tilted her imagination a little.
It's the old, I always used to attribute this to REM, and somebody recently corrected me and said it's Brian Eno. He was talking about the Velvet Underground sold like 10 albums, but all 10 people that bought it started a band. You may not be the bestseller, but if you inspired Beverly Cleary, you have done the universe a great service. So kudos to your great-grandma. All right, well, Evan, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Again, audience, it's Evan Morgan Williams' new book, probably out by the time this episode airs. It should be out. So, Stories of the New West. Seek that out. Evan, any closing comments?
No, I super appreciate being invited to join the podcast. You're a gracious host. You made this super easy for me. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it too. To our audience members, to our new ones, we are a occasional series. We usually do 4, 5, or 6 episodes every few months, whenever we can fit them in. So there will be more. Keep your eyes peeled. We're on Twitter. Kickstart Farmington is on Facebook. You can find the announcements someplace out there on the internet, all the usual places, basically. So hope to see you next time, and take care.